Okay, so this is going to be part 2 of sort of discussing the whole Adhpa thing and what this is all about, what I'm doing, and what I think it means. So it really started when I was very young. I was 4, and there was an incidence of meningitis in my family. My father got very ill. Meningitis it's a brain inflammation, so it has side effects or effects or symptomology that is often mistaken for mental illness in the initial stages of the disease. And so that can create complications. And in fact, this was back in 1967, and things, pretty different then. My father additionally worked for Public Health Service, which was a military branch. I believe it was under Department of Defense. So he was in military facilities being checked out, and they didn't understand what was going on, thought he was having a mental breakdown. It took some time. He eventually ended up in a hospital. Of course, he was quite ill. But because of that, my mother had my aunt and uncle come and take care of myself and my older brother, and my newborn sister was sort of put in the care of neighbors very soon after birth. In fact, I think my mother was tending to my father when the whole birth happened, and then he ended up in the hospital anyway. But the thing was, it seems that I also had a case of the illness. I was 4 years old. But I had already had sort of a history of not being really well. There was an incident at my birth, so I wasn't breastfed, didn't get the colostrum. There was sort of just sensitivities already evident, and so but nobody understood them. So my aunt was sort of told, oh, Mary Ann just does that, it's probably not a big deal. So she wasn't really paying attention, but something really extraordinary happened, and it's something that I both have a memory of and that I have a family historical record of, and the family had a memory of. And that was, at that time I was enrolled in a preschool, a Montessori preschool. And we had, of course, our winter break, and there was a winter concert that was put on at the break. And apparently this all was sort of happening at the same time as my father being ill, and I wasn't really feeling very well, but my mother got a call from the school and said, well, you have to bring your child. She's the star of the show. So apparently at 4 years old, I went up on this stage and I played a number of Christmas tunes on something called the Montessori bells. And the bells are much like a xylophone. They're a series of colored bells up the scale, and you play it by hitting them with little mallets. And apparently I played 3 songs and did them complete and correctly, and then went home. I have memories of the school and playing, but I have no memories of that event. And then after the winter break, in fact, when I was brought back to the classroom by my mother, the parents would bring you in, meet the teachers, and do all that stuff, and the kids would see the new classroom. I was so excited because I saw something in the other side of the room that really piqued my interest, and I ran over to it, number 4, and it was the Montessori bells. And I was just in wonder, what are these? I love these. What are they? And because I did that and had just done this show, literally every adult in the room stopped, because they had all seen me do this show. And it just was in an incongruence, because I absolutely had no recollection of that instrument or anything to do with playing it. There were some other interesting changes to my personality that seemed to occur over that time period. So that was always just something I knew about myself that stood out. There was like this missing month of time where I had learned and done this extraordinary thing and then had no inkling of it on either side, and no memory of it. It was just something that stood out. Well, when I was 8 years old, then I had an extraordinary dream. Now, I had been having dreams, and dreams that came true even. Pardon me while I take a sip of my coffee. So I, paid pretty close attention to my dreams, but this was an extraordinary dream for an 8-year-old. This would have been in 1971, approximately. I lived in Maryland in a big house, a big Victorian house that I mentioned before, and I had this dream while I was there. As I said, I was 8 at that time. So in the dream, I was on a spaceship, and it was a really, really big spaceship, and it was full of, sort of, could say, all the people of my nation. More like a whole town, maybe, something like 5,000 people. Approximately 5,000 people on this ship. And I knew I was myself. However, I didn't look like me. I was somebody else. And that child was 8, just as I was when I had the dream. And that child was, not that it matters, but just happened to be a tall, blonde girl. And I knew that I had pretty much been raised on this ship. I had lots of friends. We ran around and played on the ship, and most of the dream was about going around on the ship and doing the various things that we did. And the things that we did was, for instance, there was a grow area on the ship where all the plants and animals and everything was kept. And we would go and sit with the animals and talk to them and play with them, or sing to the plants, sit with the gardens, or pick things. Just enjoy this interior eco-space, this flying terrarium that we would go into and harvest our food from. But it was also filled with things for beauty. It wasn't just things to grow. There were also companion plantings and things there that assisted both the plants and were beautiful and medicinal, and all of that was in this area. Or we would go to classes, and in those classes we would learn about this journey that we were on and where we were going and why we were going there, along with all the other teachings that you would get to develop your skills as an 8-year-old in all the basic education stuff. And my understanding was that our whole nation had sort of been requested to come to Earth and assist the people there with technology and information and ways to live in good ways on the planet. And we had discussed this, and for many years there was discussion, and then there was finally agreement, and then there were years of constructing a craft that could do what we needed this one to do, and everything that went along with it. And then eventually, at one point, we had boarded this ship and begun the journey through space. The requirements to bring that many people, along with technology and stuff that we could show and share, was why there had to be this kind of travel and this kind of craft. And we were on that journey. And in my dream, we were getting close. This is when we were getting closer to Earth. I sort of had a hazy recollection of our planet called Kichia, K-I-C-I-A, pronounced Kichia, which I understood to be in what you would consider to be the Pleiadian star systems, around one of those stars. And so as we got close, we were really learning about things that were going to be different on Earth compared to where we had come from and what we were used to. And there were things like the difference in gravity, and other densities and other things that we would acclimatize to. But until we did acclimatize to it, it would give us certain sort of false powers. And it was mostly to do with gravity, but also to do with frequency. So there was something about our frequency being weird or higher. So these are the things that we knew. When we landed, one, we might not be visible to everyone until we acclimated down to the frequency, and that we would have like greater than normal strength or effect, like as if from that higher frequency we could more easily defy the gravity on other objects as well, and not have that effect on us. So we were being taught as kids, that we were going to have these kind of abilities, and we would have to really learn how to manage it, because it would be very odd to the humans, the other humans, because we consider ourselves cousins. I mean, we're really the same. Anyway, so we were learning these things. And then suddenly, as we were getting very close to Earth, all of a sudden, all of the adults started scurrying around, quite serious, quite concerned. There was some very extreme, something had occurred. And I was very quickly caught up. I was walking with my girlfriend along a corridor, and two adults came up to us very quickly and separated us and took us in different directions, me to my parents and her to her family. And I was taken into this area of the ship where there were pods, and I don't know if there were more than one of these areas, but probably there were. But this was a bay, and there was like a pod in there and some control equipment for that. And standing in there were my parents and my grandfather, and they were talking with their heads together, and they were very serious. And as I was coming in, I heard my mother say to my father, whatever happens, she has to get there. And then they saw me came in, and they both grabbed me and they hugged me, and they told me that there was something very serious going on, and they were going to put me in this pod with my grandfather. I needed to go with him and do whatever he asked me to do. And very quickly they put me into the pod with my grandfather, and we flew off from that ship. And as we got a little distance away from that ship, and we were moving very quickly, all of a sudden this huge explosion happened behind us and sent us flying through space. And the ship that I had just left had completely disintegrated. It took me many years to figure out what made that happen, but I do have a theory about it. And something that my grandfather said to me in that dream sort of confirms that. So he said that it had something to do with radio signals. radio frequencies. So I don't know what I have a theory, but anyway, that's what I learned in the dream. So my grandfather was flying this now damaged pod and managed to land it on Earth. Of course, we didn't know where we were, but I can tell you what the area looked like, and then it became clear to me later. So we landed in this area that was between a river and a road and a city. So it was like the outer edge of a lot of city buildings. And there were 3 tenement buildings in this area between the road and the river. And there was an empty field next to it. And these were deteriorated. They were not occupied. They were scheduled for being torn down or whatever it was. I don't know why, but they were empty. And we landed in this lot. Now, something again about the frequency when we initially landed allowed us to literally move the ship through the walls of the tenement building into the tenement building and immediately hide it. We could lift it, this old man and I. It was small, but we could lift it and move it in through the wall, literally straight through the wall. And that had to do with that initial frequency thing, which was, as I said, not to last, but it did last for a couple of days. And he was working on repairing or working with what we had there to make food or do whatever we had with that pod to give us a little place to live sort of inside this open area at the base of this tenement building, like an open apartment area, like 2 big rooms with a partition, but like the walls were already removed. So it was down to the studs. So, and I began, sort of playing in the local, going around, and I did find children there and played with them. And I was really quite popular really quick because I could jump super high and I could lift heavy things. And I would just go play with these kids while my grandfather did his thing. And then in the afternoon, I would come back. And so that went on for a few days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And I would spend time in the evenings with my grandfather learning things about medicines and our ways, just lots of things about how we did things and how we do things. And then one afternoon I was coming back from playing with the kids, and we'd been running all through the city, and which I believe now or later to have been Boston, where obviously the person having the dream was born. Any rate, so, and there was a big wrecking ball set up outside the building. And it looked like, these guys had taken pretty much all day to set this up for demolition. And, of course, I didn't know what it was. And these kids knew, but I didn't understand when they told me what was going on. It made no sense to me. I didn't know what it was. So we watched, and then it took them they were just finishing getting everything set up, and it was getting to be like 4 o'clock. So they did what they would do back in those days, and I didn't know this until much later, but they did like a test run of the ball. So they dropped the ball one time into the building just to make sure that it's on the target location that they want it to be. And then they string it back up for the night, and everyone goes home, and then the next day they come and really demolish the building. So they did that one strike, and of course I was not expecting that. And I also knew that my grandfather was inside that building, but the adults still couldn't see us like the kids could. And as soon as that ball hit the building, boy, I went just running in there, because of course I knew my grandfather was in there. And sure enough, when I got in there, he was trapped under a beam that had come down from above and hit him. And I was able to move the beam off of him, but I was not able to save his life. And I sat with him while he passed, very much regretting all the times I'd kind of shirked off learning things, because I might have been able to help him if I had paid closer attention and learned our healing ways. But I didn't. And so I got up and I walked out of that building, just kind of walking. And that's when I woke up from that dream at 8 years old. It was a very poignant, long, intensive dream. It was extremely emotional, and I never forgot it. But the name that my grandfather used for me in that dream was Adhpa. And so that's where Adhpa comes from. As to what the dream means, I have a theory. Anyway, leave me your theories. Like, subscribe. Let's talk about it.